Our final talk of the day, I'm looking forward to all of us learning a bit about a new trend that's taking place in society. And it's one that as we ask you this question, you said it's happening in many of your lives and in your family. And so our survey stat basically asks you this: have you personally experienced distance or estrangement in your family? 42% of you said yes. And then we ask you, how long did that estrangement last in your family? 39% of you said longer than 5 years. 3 to 5 years, 20%, 1 to 2 years, 26%, less than a year, 15%. The bottom line is, almost 4 out of 10 of you have experienced family estrangement. This is a trend that's taking place more and more in society, and some of you may not have experienced, and you wonder, what is this trend about? Well, we have the expert who understands this to explain it to us. He's a psychotherapist. His name is Matthias Barker. He has an incredible following on Instagram where he uses that platform to help educate people more and more to how to have better, healthy dynamics in their relationships. He spends a lot of time with parents, better understanding their children's perspective, and a lot of time helping children better understand their parents' perspective. He's in the work. He does this work day in and day out. He just flew back from Oxford to be with us today so that he could deliver this talk. His name is Dr. Matthias Barker, and he's going to deliver a talk on the family estrangement trend. He's the founder of Estrangement.com. Will you join me in welcoming Matthias Barker? Welcome. Thanks.
More families are divided than ever. A 2023 study came out, 2023, that showed that 26% of participants 18 and older had cut off contact with a parent. And that number's a lot higher in Christian communities, is what I'm finding. If you spread that out to siblings, it's 1 in 2 people are estranged from a family member. A fourth of our population, at least, is in a family crisis. When I say estrangement, what I mean is an adult child that's cut off contact with a parent, or functionally so sometimes someone will not directly say, like, no, I'm not speaking to you, I don't want you to talk to me. Other times they don't say anything and they just pull back, and you get this ambiguous, awkward silence, full of unexpressed expectations, unnamed boundaries, and lots of landmines that parents tiptoe around, trying to know what to do. The term estrangement, it actually comes from 2 Latin terms, one meaning to treat as a stranger, the second meaning to not belong to a family. And everyone's been asking, why is this happening? Well, I mean, it kind of depends who you ask. A Cambridge survey came out and asked parents, okay, why is this happening? Why did your child cut contact with you? And the first thing that most parents will say is that the divorce probably has something to do with it, and that's helpful to know, is that in 70% of cases of estrangement, divorce is in the picture. It's not the cause per se, but it's in the soup of factors that contribute to these conflicts. The next one, if talking about a son, is the in-law, often a daughter-in-law. And the story goes something like, well, he started dating that woman, and then she started putting negative thoughts in his mind and started getting him to see the family in a negative light and started pointing out all these things and kind of turning him against his family. And a survey of 1,000 mothers who were estranged from their children, nearly 80% believed that an ex-husband or their son or daughter-in-law had turned their children against them. In that same study, only 16% of mothers thought their behavior had anything to do with it. When it comes to daughters, though, the story's a little bit different. It's not as common that, an in-law is blamed. Mental health seems to be the reason that most daughters cut off from the parent's point of view. Well, she's bipolar. Well, she's borderline. Well, she has anxiety. If you notice the theme, it's interesting, huh? If the daughter cuts you off, it's because she's crazy. If the son cuts you off, it's because the wife is crazy. So, yeah, that's unfortunate. Why do the kids say they're cutting off their parents? Do they say, well, it's because of my mental health? It's because of my crazy wife? No. Emotional abuse, neglect, mismatch, and expectations. And yet, when I tell parents about this, the first thing they say is, well, I didn't really do any of that. We had a normal family. And I think that's relatable. I think a lot of us could be saying, well, I get it in cases of trauma. I get it in cases of intense abuse. But like emotional abuse, emotional neglect, like we didn't do that. We had food on the table. I always loved them. I always did my best. And I think what we have to acknowledge is like what's considered trauma is changing. If you grew up in 60s, 70s, even the 80s, what you thought about trauma was that it was a near-death experience, most likely. And you thought about abuse as physical harm, someone getting beat with a stick or something, right? That's not exactly how adult kids now, millennials, Gen Z, are thinking about this word. Even, when the PTSD diagnosis came into the DSM, that's the manual that, psychotherapists and psychologists use to diagnose. It was described, see it here, as something outside the range of usual human experience, and that would be markedly distressing to almost anyone, right? Outside the range, so not the normal stuff of just growing up in the family, the normal conflicts that would happen. An incredible essay called The Concept Creep of Trauma, I recommend that you read it. Says that now people commonly describe experiences such as infidelity or uncomplicated childbirth or graduate school or media violence or overheard sexist remarks as traumatic. And maybe you've seen that too. All the TikToks and all the Instagrams that seem to paint everything as traumatic. It seems like the problem is that, people are reacting to these minor events with these huge, big responses. Because the reality also is that beating with a stick, it does not equal looks of disgust and disapproval. But there's more to the story here. And I want to just fill you in on how trauma science has kind of evolved since the 80s and 90s. Because with the advent of the ACE studies, you might have heard of that before, and other studies that kind of look at the neurophysiology and neurobiology of trauma. If anyone's heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score, he was somebody, Bessel van der Kolk, who kind of pioneered this look into what the brain looks like in different cases of trauma. I had lunch with him 3 days ago in Oxford, and we were talking about how in social media it seems like these terms are changing and people are talking about different things. And what we're trying to synthesize and make sense out of are studies like this. Like you have a study, 5,616 youth with a lifetime history of one or more of 3 forms of maltreatment. So you have psychological maltreatment, that's the emotional abuse and the emotional neglect. The physical abuse and the sexual abuse. The study revealed children who have experienced emotional abuse and neglect deal with comparable, sometimes worse, mental health issues than those children who have been physically or sexually abused. And we didn't believe it when we first saw it. When this research was happening, early 2000s, mid 2000s, we kept replicating it and repeating it, and the pattern held that emotional abuse can be just as destructive as physical. It wasn't just the severity. And we started to realize, well, we can't just look at the severity, right? We need to look at frequency and duration, because you can die if you're getting beat with a stick. But you can also die a death of 1,000 paper cuts. And a look of disgust, that's not a big deal. I could look at you with disgust, or I could beat you with a stick, and you would take disgust every time. But what about when it's your mom or your dad, and it's every 10 minutes, every day, for the first couple decades of your life? What does that do? Still people will say, well, if we were to pit them against each other, beating with a stick is still worse than the disgust. Like, if you had a pattern of beating with a stick, that's still worse than a pattern of disgust. But at the end of the day, what we're not really asking is which is worse. What we're asking is what is sufficient to create a traumatic response. We actually have that data very concretely. Or more specifically, what's sufficient to break a parent-child bond? What's the threshold? And what's funny is we actually know this answer when it comes to marriage. So check the study out. John Gottman, if anyone knows that name, love him as a researcher. So the frequency of the wife's facial expressions, they literally counted. They literally, would look at her face and count the times that she would go, whatever. The number of times the wife's facial expressions correlated with the number of months the couple was to separate in the next 4 years. What? Something as simple as that, 4 years? What about if it's over a lifetime and you're the child? it just starts to make me wonder if divorce can result from these subtle negative patterns like repeated disgust, not just the severity of severe events like violence. The same might apply to parent-child estrangement. And still, I think a lot of parents will look and say, well, hold on, like, these aren't huge injuries. Like, all I did was say something about her tattoo. All I did was buy 2 expensive birthday presents. And the question I ask right out of the gate is like, well, hold on, what if they're not responding to a moment? They're responding to a pattern. And what I want to leave you with is not some message that it's all the parents' fault. I'm not saying that. Like, in parent-child estrangement, it's adults. Both people are responsible for being able to work these things out together and speak honestly about what they're experiencing and to try to see it from the other person's side. I mean, the good news here, actually, is that the biggest predictor for estrangement is not the severity of the relational injuries or even the frequency or their duration. The biggest predictor for estrangement is how often you repair. And that goes for both adult kids and parents. You can't repair something that's not acknowledged. And so for any parents in the room, do you have the courage to look at these moments your kids are responding intensely to and to look underneath and see if there's a pattern they might be trying to point to? And kids, can you speak authentically, openly, and honestly about the patterns that are getting in the way? And instead of just pulling back, instead of pushing boundaries, can we try to take a step towards repair? There's lots mixed all in and through that conversation, much more to be said than just in 10 minutes, but I'm grateful. Thank you so much, everybody.